What's going on, everyone? Onyx Spade here. Welcome to another episode of Movie What. And today on Movie What, I'm going to talk about a movie that I just got done watching, actually. And this, to me, is considered now to be in my top 10 favorite movies. And for this to be a modern movie that's still in theaters, I even have surprised myself. Now, what I'm going to be reviewing for everyone today is the movie Creed. Now, Creed came out recently in theaters, and I had high hopes for this movie. And I was right. I was actually right. This was, to me, an amazing movie, which, to me, ended the Rocky franchise and created a new franchise, which is titled Creed. Now, before I get into Creed, I want to reminisce on the Rocky movies. You know, the rise, fall, and risen life of Rocky Balboa. From the first movie, where he lost, technically, to Apollo Creed. Well, technically it was a tie, but Apollo had won. In the second movie, Apollo lost to Rocky. In the third movie, basically Rocky lost the title to Clubber Lang and regained it back due to help from his former rival slash best friend, Apollo Creed. Then Rocky IV, which was the death of Apollo Creed, and the higher rise of Rocky Balboa to Rocky VI, which not many people really like that movie because Rocky quits boxing due to concussions and things like that, and tries to teach, Machine Gun how to fight. And of course, Machine Gun gets caught up in the whole boxing, greed per se, turns against Rocky, and Rocky whoops his ass. Then, in the last Rocky movie, was where Rocky lost his wife Adrian, and he still trained personally, but he was able to get the monster out of him, finally, from that movie. And then there's Creed. Creed is on a completely different level to me. Creed, to me, is not only the ending of Rocky Balboa, the franchise, but also is the increase and rise of a new franchise, which is called Creed. And Michael B. Jordan played as Adonis Johnson, which was basically a baby that was not supposed to exist. Basically, Apollo Creed got into an affair with his wife, and a baby was born from another mother. And this is basically the rise of this boy, Adonis Johnson, but later on you call him Adonis Creed, or Donnie Creed, depending on which type of slang you want to use. Now, Adonis Creed, well, we'll call him Johnson for now. Adonis Johnson started off with a really rough child life. He was in juvie a lot and really didn't have a family like that. And of course, with his dad dying like he did, he didn't really know much about his upbringing per se. But then you see in the beginning of the movie that Apollo Creed's widowed wife comes and finds him, takes him out of juvie, and time goes by, he grows up, and you see Michael B. Jordan portraying Adonis Johnson. And he does some underground boxing, which sounds very familiar, doesn't it? If you remember Rocky 1, Rocky started off doing some underground boxing until he decided to have his fight with Apollo Creed in Rocky 1. So that was kind of like a homage of Rocky 1, where, okay, Adonis Johnson is doing underground boxing. That's cool. And even Adonis, he had his own job, which was they didn't really come out and say what his job was, but I think it was more of like an accounting job or something maybe, but it was an office job. And he quit that so he could pay attention to boxing. Now, Adonis is the type of guy where he watched a lot of his father's original fights with Rocky Balboa on YouTube, which is very interesting. And he could mirror Rocky Balboa's fighting style, but I noticed that he didn't really mirror his father's, which I could kind of understand why. Adonis is the type of person which was very similar to Rocky's son in Rocky Balboa, the recent movie before this one, where he didn't like the fact that he was always going to be in the shadow of his father, Rocky Balboa. In this particular case, in Creed, the opposite thing happens, where Adonis doesn't want to be like his father. He wants to make a name for himself, but he does it in the form of boxing, in his own name. In Rocky Balboa's son doesn't want to be a boxer. He wants to have his own life, and he resents his father in a way in the beginning parts of Rocky Balboa the movie, but doesn't do it in a boxing type of way. He becomes a normal member of society. Adonis has that, like I said, the opposite effect, which you kind of can catch my drift on it now. But things go by. He leaves his, I guess you could say, foster mom at the time, I guess you could say. Because, Apollo Creed's real wife is not really Adonis' real mother. I guess you could say she's like a stepmother, I guess. I don't know. We'll just call her stepmother. So he basically moves out of his stepmother's house and goes to Philly, where Rocky Balboa is. Gets his own little apartment, and he basically is trying to find somebody to train him. And nobody will train him because of the simple fact that Adonis is a hothead. He's very stubborn. Nobody will train him. Not even anybody that was affiliated with Apollo Creed back in the day. Nobody would train him. So, this is where things take an interesting turn, where Adonis meets a female named Bianca. Bianca is basically like his next door neighbor. And you find out later on that she's a singer. And she's, I guess you could say, a nurturer, a cuddler, I guess you could say. I automatically liked the love scenes and adaptation scenes between Bianca and Adonis because it was similar to Rocky and Adrian, but it was in a more modern type of feel. Plus, there wasn't a lot of beating around the bush like Rocky was when he was trying to get to know Adrian. And kind of the same thing with Bianca, except Bianca had a little bit of the personality of Adrian when they were meeting each other, but it was a little bit more realistic, I guess you could say. But down the road, he finds Rocky. I'm not going to spoil the whole movie, but he ends up finding Rocky. Rocky at first is being stubborn. He doesn't want to train anybody. He's out of the business because of what happened in Rocky Balboa, the movie before this. And, he ends up, of course, training Adonis. And that's all I'm really going to talk about in the movie because I don't want to spoil it for everybody because it's still in the theaters. But I will say that this movie brought some tears to my eyes. Tears in my eyes as in happiness because there wasn't too much drama. There wasn't, too much negativity in most movies that you see these days. To me, this is one of those, and I never thought I would say this about a modern movie. This is considered one of the almost perfect movies that I've ever watched because I was on the edge of my seat and I was screaming Creed the whole entire fucking time, and I loved every minute of it. I loved every minute of the movie. There was nothing wrong with this movie. It was perfect to me. Now, most people will probably think differently, But this is my channel. This is my movie what. This is my episode. I think this was a perfect movie. And if you're a Rocky fan, you will enjoy this movie. You will literally want to see this movie. And like I said, this is the ending of the Rocky name and the beginning of Creed. Because also the way that the movie ended is that there's probably going to be a sequel. And I will not mind seeing the sequel. I hope and pray that the sequel is as good as this movie. Because I loved this movie. I was screaming off the top of my lungs. I was, chanting Creed. I kept telling them to get up, beat the hell out of the people. I was loving every minute of it. And there was a lot of scenes in the movies that felt like tributes to the other Rocky movies. Like, for example, in the first part of Adonis's upbringing, he does underground boxing, which is exactly what Rocky was doing. And Rocky won. One of the challengers that Adonis goes against, when they go and stand face to face with each other in the ring, and the referee is, talking about the rules of the game, Adonis does his hands like this, to do the little break thing with the boxing thing, and Adonis's opponent slams his hands down, just like when it was Rocky versus Drago in Rocky 4. And I was so loving that. And this certain opponent that I'm talking about, he has the attitude of Drago, but the fighting style of Clubber Lang. And I thought it was absolutely amazing and everything like that. Just the challenger acts like Drago and Clubber Lang. Now, Adonis's fighting style is basically kind of his own. He's not really mirroring his father, but he's not really mirroring Rocky Balboa either. But you can see a little bit of Rocky come out of Adonis. But you can see a little bit of the cockiness and rough attitude of Apollo Creed. And I like that. I like that they weren't trying to copy, Apollo Creed. And I liked how they weren't trying to copy, Rocky Balboa. It was just perfect to me. And plus, at the same time, I consider this what I would call a redemption film. Where basically, this was kind of like a continuation of Apollo's goal of being the greatest. And that's kind of how I felt when it came to watching this movie with Adonis Johnson. Now, it's kind of hard for me to call him Adonis Johnson, but I think people these days will want to call him Adonis Creed. And around the end of the movie, you kind of see the little transition that goes on from Adonis Johnson to Adonis Creed. And I thought it was just plain phenomenal. This is a phenomenal movie. Now, I will say this. If you are into boxing movies, if you are into the Rocky Balboa franchise, you will enjoy this film. If you like anything that has to do with Michael B. Jordan or anything that has to do with Sylvester Stallone, watch this movie. Now, recently I did the Fantastic Four review, which was absolutely terrible. And yes, Michael B. Jordan was in that movie, and he did good acting, but he was out of place as Johnny Storm in Fantastic Four. And I also did make an error in my review for Fantastic Four. I accidentally said that Johnny Storm was the one that was adopted, when actually it was, Sue Storm that was adopted, not Johnny Storm. So sorry about that error, by the way. But when it came to Michael B. Jordan's portraying as Adonis Creed, this was his movie. This was his blowout movie right here. I loved it. And, I hope and pray that if there is a sequel, that it's as good as this one. Because this was it was like a combination of the ending of Rocky Balboa and the rise of Adonis Creed to also a tribute to the other movies. Now, I am going to do a small spoiler, but it won't really ruin the movie. In Rocky Balboa, Adrian dies. And Rocky goes to, the graves and sits there with his chair and talks to Adrian in that movie. In this movie, Paulie's dead. Paulie was buried beside Adrian. And in this movie, it shows Rocky going to go visit not only Adrian, but going to visit Paulie. And he brings Paulie a small little thing of liquor, and he sticks it right beside his grave, and and gets a rose for Adrian, and sits there with the paper like he always did, just like in the original Rocky Balboa, and just talks to them. That part right there took me off guard, and I did actually cry in that part because even though Paulie was an interesting judge of character, he was still extremely important in the Rocky Balboa franchise, especially Rocky Balboa, the movie that came before Creed. And there's a lot of people that will say that, oh, this ain't a Rocky movie. You're right, it's not a Rocky movie, but, like I keep saying, this is the ending of the Rocky Balboa era and the beginning of Adonis Creed, Adonis Johnson. And what would I rate this movie? Well, I haven't really done a review of the other Rocky movies, but I do plan on doing it in the future. And I guess this can be kind of like my way of starting that off by why not talking about the new Creed movie, you know what I'm talking about? So, what would I rate Creed? I think it's worth this rating, and there will be lower ratings than this, but I'd like to see some backup and some proof and actual details as to why someone would rate this movie lower than this. I rate this movie a 10 out of 10 because it kept me at the edge of my seat. It didn't have too much drama. It didn't have too many crying scenes. It didn't have, everything that the original Rocky movies lacked. This movie fixed that. When I say that Creed to me is a perfect movie, it is a perfect movie. When I say that it's in my top 10 favorite movies, that means it means something to me. This movie opened my eyes to many different possibilities on what they could do with Adonis Creed now. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I'm going to say this toward the ending. I liked how they ended the movie. And some people will probably be like, oh, that's freaking cheap of an ending. But I think the ending fit the movie. And if anybody says that the ending is bad, then they really don't understand the concept of the movie. But I rate this movie a 10 out of 10. I recommend this movie to anybody that watches movies. I recommend this movie to anybody that watches Rocky Balboa, that's a fan of Sylvester Stallone, and even likes the acting of Michael B. Jordan. I suggest that you watch this movie. It'll change your life like it changed mine. I see things a lot more clearly now that I watch this movie. And I hope a lot of people will see the same thing I did when I was watching this. And that's really all I got to say about it. That's really all I got to say. And I'm happy with this review. I put out every single emotion and every single fiber of my being in this review. And I'm trying not to cry right now because I really, really enjoyed this movie. But whenever this movie comes out on DVD, I'm going to be buying it. I'm going to be adding it to my collection because I have the other Rocky movies. And there's nothing anybody can do to stop me. So, thank you so much for watching this episode of Movie What. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you haven't seen this in theaters, go and see it right now. because you'll either be watching this before you go see it in theaters, or after you see it in theaters, or you're going to watch it, or you're going to watch this when you've seen it on DVD. But I suggest everybody to go and watch this in theaters while it's still in theaters. But if you're watching this while it's on DVD, good for you for buying the DVD. I hope you enjoyed it. So, thank you so much for watching. This is Onyx Spade, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!